I'm Tommy Salmons. This is year zero. As you've already noticed, it's another one of them episodes. I'm on the road. No intro. Just going to bring you my notes. And I've spent the last couple of hours going through my ideas, trying to make sure I had it all down. I'm going to pretty much be going straight from the notepad. I might expand as I go along. It just depends on how it's looking. So, the first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to mention something I didn't mention last week when talking about Julian Assange. So, with the release of this new indictment and the revealing of the new indictment, what I think is going to happen, I think what's going to end up happening, because Britain falls under the EU laws of extradition. So what I think is going to end up happening is, since Sweden brought these charges back up for sexual assault or rape, that he will be extradited to Sweden, and then they don't, as John Kiriakou said, they don't fall under the EU rules. EU rules says he cannot be extradited for any charge that would constitute a death penalty. So I think what's going to end up happening is he's going to end up getting extradited to Sweden and then swiftly extradited to the U.S. That's kind of how I see that going. But that's not the main subject I wanted to talk about. I just wanted to touch on that for a second, just to kind of give you an idea of what I was thinking was going on with that. And I felt like I should have included it last week, but I'd already published the episode, and what could I do? So, the other day, my mom texted me, and Dana Perino had made a comment on the 5, and my mom noticed this, and she swiftly texted me, and she's like, "You'll never believe what I just heard. Dana Perino said, I believe in Police the World." And so I was like, okay, well, let me go check out this episode. I haven't watched it. I don't watch the 5 a lot. I do find Greg Gutfeld funny, but whatever. I just don't watch the show that often. So I found it online, and I watched it, and yeah, she said, Greg Gutfeld said, "You love wars," and she goes, "Well, I believe in Police the World. I do." And so she was very blunt with it, and it wasn't really surprising. She had been in the Bush administration, so I wasn't shocked by this revelation. This wasn't something that took me off guard and oh my God, what do I do? It's But the idea that anybody still adheres to this belief of Team America World Police after the atrocities of the last 18 years shows you just how insane statism is. Just how fucking nuts these people are that believe in the nation state, that look at it as some sort of benevolent force for good around the world. It's almost like they've been in a coma for the last 2 decades. And as long as people continue to believe the plot of dirt they're located on at birth equals an inherent worth, collectivism in some form will continue to result in deaths of innocent people around the world. Refugees will continue to flee their countries. The U.S. I kind of stumbled over that because something happened. Sorry. Refugees will continue to flee the countries targeted by the U.S., and the citizens living under the U.S. system will continue to see their rights trampled. I mean, where the surveillance state is going to continue to grow out of control, even more so than it already is. And yes, a lot of this I'm reading. I wrote a lot of this down. I'm really bad about wanting my notes in front of me and reading from my notes whenever I'm doing a solo episode. So if I stumble a couple of times, it is because I'm reading and I'm tired. I drove 10 hours today and I took about 5 hours of research to put this together after I had been thinking about it for the last 3 days of how I wanted to put it together. So I'm pretty tired right now. I've been running for quite a while today. So one of the things I was looking at earlier in the week was I found an article from last June, and I think they release it every year. So I'm guessing the new one's going to be coming out here shortly. But this was from 2018. It was the most dangerous countries in the world. And it was weird because I was looking at it and I was like, 10 of the top 15 most dangerous countries in the world have one reoccurring thread: American intervention. The arming of rebels, financing coups, economic war, sanctions, things of that nature, training opposition forces, all these things were involved. But I want to cover the top 7, and it might take a little while to get through this, and I'm not certain how long it's going to take, but I wanted to go through the top 7 because every one of the top 7 are explicitly American casualties and should be looked at, discussed, and reported as such. The crimes of the U.S. government and their intelligence agencies should not be covered up, and they should not be defended. So the number 1 most dangerous country in the world is Syria. So if you don't remember, it'd be wise to go look back at Obama's red line in the sand. And one of the comments he made was, and I quote, "We've been very clear to the Assad regime, but also to other players on the ground, that a red line for us is if we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized." And he said that on August 21st, 2012. On December 23rd, 2012, chemical weapons were used in Homs. At first, the State Department was certain Assad was to blame. But by mid-January, the National Security Council admitted that the attack was not consistent with Syria's chemical weapons program. This continued, like we all know this has continued. This whole, there's a chemical weapons attack, Assad did it, oh wait, never mind, no he didn't. That's gone on and on and on and on. I think Scott Horton just did an episode the other day clearing up the latest chlorine attack that they had investigated, saying, "Oh well, what they originally reported was such and such, but after an investigation, it appears that the chlorine canisters were either were placed there by hand or already there when the shelling took place, and the chlorine was not released or whatever." So the tension ramped up throughout 2013 with several instances reported, yet none proven to be carried out by the Assad regime, yada, yada, yada. And it's weird because how did an almost irrelevant country in 2010 become the leader of crimes against the humanity in 2013? Look no further than the CIA. In 2011, the CIA was working with Saudi Arabia, and they began carrying out Saudi Arabian's policy in Syria under Operation Timber Sycamore. I don't think the operation was actually given the name Timber Sycamore until 2013, when they began arming and the military training for the rebels. but the funding and the moving of money and the propaganda began moving in 2011, and that was it. The Civil War was underway. It didn't take long. Now, most of us remember that when tensions ratcheted up to the point where Assad's regime was accused of crossing the red line, that the U.S. soldiers began protesting the war and being sent to Syria by posting pics on social media of themselves in uniform holding a sign in front of their face that said, "I did not join the military to fight alongside Al-Qaeda." And so, like, that seemed to have worked, but you know, the talk of deployment began to quiet down. Obama kind of backed off of the heavy-handed talk and acting like a tough guy. But secretly, the plan to send military into Syria unannounced began. U.S. military are still in Syria illegally today at the behest of Saudi Arabia and the CIA, despite the protests and all the calls and everybody saying, no, this is bullshit. We have no fucking business in Syria. We're still there today. And now we have people defending it. And it's weird. It's weird because Obama sent the troops into Syria illegally, and you have Trump supporters defending it. And it's like, what? Like, who's the cuck now, man? Like, seriously. So that was number one on the list, Syria, the number one most dangerous country in the world. The number two most dangerous country in the world, come as no surprise to any of you, Afghanistan. And I think it goes without saying, but if you've not read Scott Horton's book, Fool's Errand, you've not even scratched the surface of what is happening or what has happened in Afghanistan. I think most people know more about Afghanistan than most of these other places on the list. So I'm just going to keep this brief real quick. Just a quick overview. Osama bin Laden and 400 insurgents calling themselves Al-Qaeda orchestrated attacks on 9/11/2001 with the funding of Saudi royalty in order to lure the U.S. into a war of attrition and attempt to bankrupt the United States. Though the Taliban initially wanted to gift the U.S. bin Laden, which they were negotiating with the Bush administration, trying to hand over bin Laden, offering all kinds of things, offering to go through third parties, this, that, and the other. The Bush administration refused and insisted that we were going to go to war in Afghanistan, and ended up making enemies of the Taliban. And today, we're still fighting the Taliban in Afghanistan. Actually, I just read a story. I think it was like 3 or 4 days ago. Like 4 soldiers were killed by Taliban, an attack of Taliban in Afghanistan. So it's like it could have been wham bam, thank you ma'am, done and over with, not cost anything near what it's cost to be in Afghanistan for the last 18 years. Could have had Osama bin Laden, most of Al-Qaeda in possession without setting foot on Afghani soil, and the Bush administration insisted that we had to go to war. That's all there was to it. The number 3 most dangerous country in the world, South Sudan. So there's not a whole lot I know about South Sudan. I've done some reading on it tonight, trying to get it all together and figure out, okay, what all's happened there, what all's happening there today. So as best I can tell, and what I was reading, and I should have wrote down these article names, and I apologize, I didn't do that. In 1978, oil was discovered in South Sudan. And at that time, it was still part of Sudan proper, Sudan whole, however you want to say it. After the discovery of oil, the CIA did what it does, and it quickly moved in on the cash crop and excuse me, and began to work for the in favor of their business interests. Um, that again, I'm how they implemented this strategy. I was unable to find anything, so the details are kind of murky here. But in 1983, a second civil war started in Sudan, and so I think they had a civil war from like 1955 to 1972, and then in 1983, the CIA had created enough tension in Sudan uh, by teaming up with some of the rebel forces and liberation forces, and they were able to kick off another civil war that went on for like 22 years to like 2005. Finally, in 2011, the secession was complete. The international community was recognizing South Sudan as its own nation. And, that just proves to show that, like, policing the world works, because now the U.S. doesn't have to deal with the tough and gritty Omar al-Bashir, the president of Sudan, to deal with oil and to buy resources from. They installed Salva Kiir, the former military intelligence specialist. South Sudan has been locked in a civil war since 2013, but the CIA has their oil money, so there's that. Yeah, who cares if they're still if another civil war broke out in South Sudan, as long as they get their oil money, as long as they're getting their resources for really cheap, they can hook up their business interests. Who cares? They got what they came for, right? That's what it's all about. This is what policing the world looks like. Number 4, another one that's going to be of no surprise to any of you, Iraq. And again, I'm going to say it's a subject most of you are pretty familiar with, so I'm going to be brief here. It wasn't long after installing the CIA puppet Hussein into power that the U.S. felt they had to bitch slap him into serving their interests, because he kept getting out of line, because he was a madman and uncontrollable. But it wasn't until he started discussing abandoning the petrodollar that the time was at hand to remove him from power. And as soon as he started talking about, maybe I'm going to trade for oil in euros or yen or whatever the hell he was talking about, creating his own currency, who knows? The U.S. like, oh, nope, we can't have any of that. So they manufactured lies about cultivating weapons of mass destruction in order to garner public support for war with Iraq. Went to war with Iraq in 2003, fucked that entire country up, created this huge vacuum where all these clans rose up and started fighting against each other. And they tried to install democracy. That didn't work. They tried nation building. That didn't work. Yeah, we're still there. What, 16 years later? Still there. Just another casualty of America. Number 5 on the list, Somalia. Now, when has Somalia not been in tatters? Looking into this, I was looking at 2006. There were WikiLeaks published some cables that revealed that the United States had pressured, encouraged, and bribed Ethiopia to invade militarily. To this day, the U.S. is using airstrikes in Somalia. Between April and May of this year, there were 5 airstrikes targeting ISIS in the African country. Ethiopia continues its utilitarian role, having released a map of Africa without Somalia on it. And so it's just like this constant bombardment on the country of Somalia. And for what? And I was looking into the history a little bit, and it appears like Somalia gained its independence in 1960, and they were a pretty peaceful country for about 9 years, and then there was a coup attempt, and Ethiopia invaded. Clans began to rise up, um, and there were these tribal wars for power. And it's weird because Somalia is often used against anarchists as proof anarchist societies can't work, but there's no such power as a government power to fight over in an anarchist society. And so some people may attempt to use violence and acquire that power, but before they are able to garnish such a power, you would think that they would be met by resistance. Free people that want to remain free, they don't want to live under servitude of a state or a warlord or a tyrant of any sort. Do you think they're going to see like some dude rising up like 3 villages over or even a state over and say, man, he's not bothering us? No, man, this dude's rising up and using force and killing people. Your family, you might have family that live in that state or whatever, and this guy's using violence to inflict his tyranny upon the people of this state. Hell no, you're not going to sit around. I often think about the Tennessee Volunteers, the men that took up arms and left Tennessee and went and helped Texas fight for its independence from Mexico. Like that's what you're going to be looking at. So I don't think it's a fair and accurate summation to say, well, the warring clans is exactly what you would have in an anarchist society. And so when I'm looking at Somalia, I'm met with the realization that the violence that you're seeing in the world around you, it's created by government and those that wish to be government. If you take a look at Somaliland, like up north, or Puntland, these are self-attributed, autonomous, decentralized regions with little violence. And then you contrast them with southern Somalia, the main land of Somalia, those who still claim Somalia as their nation. And it's evident that the problem is the establishment of government to monopolize violence for political purposes and not freedom. Because the two regions that are claiming freedom and decentralized are fairly peaceful and go about their business in a social way, as if they might have a society, an organized society without the threat of violence. Go figure. Who would have thunk it? The number 6 on the list was Yemen. And a lot of people are going to know like what's going on in Yemen. Again, I'm going to keep it fairly brief. It's about, I don't know, paragraph I got here. So in 2014, 2015, the Obama administration showed sympathy with Saudi Arabia and supplied support for a war on Yemen when the Houthis took power. So reportedly, Saudi Arabia was concerned with Iranian support and access to the Yemeni ports. And, that sounds horrible. Who wants Iran to have access to ports? Except Iran's ability to assist anyone is extremely limited given the devastating sanctions that have depleted the nation to the point of inability to offer aid to Iranian flood victims. I mean, they couldn't even find a working helicopter to go rescue people when they had this like major flood earlier this year. So I have a hard time believing they're really like funding this revolution in any major way. I mean, if they've supplied any assistance whatsoever, it's probably negligible at best. I would guess. That's my what I've entered. Unless they would rather fund the Houthis than take care of their own helicopters and their own supplies there in their own country. I mean, I guess they care more about Yemen than they do about Iran. The U.S. government cares more about Israel than they do about the U.S. So, I mean, I guess it's possible. But, I mean, you take into consideration that the U.S. put such an evil blockade on Yemen that children were dying of cholera. Again, like all they had to do was they didn't even need medication. They needed like Gatorade. They needed electrolytes. I mean, I bet milk would have been all right, you know. And you had children dying by the thousands of cholera. We've seen school buses bombed, funerals, weddings bombed, citizens murdered, and all based upon U.S. support and U.S. intelligence. I mean, we got combat soldiers, special forces combat soldiers right on the border, just in case, I guess, the Houthis decide to take up arms and hit the ground. I think, again, I'm sorry about the yawning. I think they happen to shoot a rocket into the vicinity of Saudi Arabia like once every 4 or 5 months in an attempt to defend themselves against the two biggest militaries in the world. And then number 7, we come to the last one here. Number 7 is Libya. We came, we saw, he died. Hillary Clinton's most infamous cackle after being informed Gaddafi had been tortured, beaten, and sodomized with a machete before dying in the street. So to the credit of the U.S. here, there was no attempt to nation build once the coup was complete. Gaddafi made the mistake of looking to a gold standard to trade for oil instead of the petrodollar. I don't even know if he had taken action on it. I think he was just floating the idea. So the CIA acted quickly to protect their interests. The coup succeeded. Clans continue to war for state control. And an open slave market may be watched for your pleasure, streamed from the streets of Libya on YouTube. So there you go. So that's the gist of what I wanted to cover today. I knew it was going to be a little shorter because I have my cool intro, so I don't get all fired up with all the, but that's all right. That's okay. But that's what policing the world looks like. The U.S. intervening in the world, around the world, doesn't make the world safer. In fact, the U.S. is the 43rd most dangerous country on the list. Why, you may ask? Because the police interact with us in the cities and in our own communities the exact same way that the military interacts with foreigners. And I heard Dave Smith always says, I think it's on his intro, if you want to know who America's next enemy is going to be, look at who they're funding today. And I'm starting to believe that if you want to know what America's police are going to look like tomorrow, look at what the military looks like today. Because the more time goes on, the more militarized the police become. And all because of the war on drugs. All because of the war on drugs, we have a more militarized police. We have black markets, and we have combat on the streets. I'm going to end this with a quote from Scott Horton because he said it the best when he said so plainly, Americans are the only people in this world stupid enough to believe that when they intervene in another nation, they are there to help. No other country believes that. No other country believes that once American military shows up on their sovereign soil, that it's going to be good for that nation. I hope y'all got something out of this. I thought it was worth like talking about a little bit. I know these episodes when I'm on the road are shorter. It's something I'm working on right now. It's really difficult to be able to record from the road because of the hours I keep. So thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for listening. I'm Tommy Salmons. Late.